Can you hear me? Okay, sounds good. How about now? Can you hear me? All right, we're gonna get started here on today's live. We attempted this a couple of days ago, but our audio was a little off. So here we are. Hopefully, it works better for us this time. I wanted to talk about a topic that has been super prevalent. I actually think this topic is prevalent all the time, but super prevalent lately in the past couple of weeks in talking to parents. So I figured it would be a good topic to talk about, and it's boundaries, right? If you ever feel like your child kind of like runs the house, like you're afraid to say no because your child might explode, yelling, hitting, complete meltdown, the power struggle. So you kind of have to have convince yourself that saying yes is the better option in that moment because you don't want to deal with that. You're one, you're not alone, and two, this is exactly what I want to talk about today. Setting why setting boundaries is hard, and more importantly, I think why not setting them actually makes things worse. What you can do about it starting this week, see if we can start changing that dynamic. Most parents I work with always share with me some type of version of this one sentence. I feel like I am constantly walking on eggshells, or I feel like I never know what to do because I'm afraid of the reaction that I'm going to get from my child. And it's not because they are bad parents, it's because truly they're exhausted. And so the last thing that they want to do is trigger a meltdown, an aggression episode, or something like that when they know how to avoid it by giving in or not holding the boundary. The thing about that is that it starts small, starts like, I don't want to deal with that right now. It's better if I just don't say no, or I give them what they want. But what that does in the long term is that everything around the household starts to revolve around avoiding conflict, which is what leads most parents to feel like they're constantly walking on eggshells, or that they're constantly afraid of whatever reaction their child might have. And the truth is that when you avoid setting boundaries, things don't get easier, they actually get harder. It may be easier right now in the short term to avoid this one episode when you feel exhausted and it's the end of your day. But in the long term, it's actually creating a bigger, more intense, harder to deal with problem. So I want to go a little bit more into that now that we are aware again that it's going to be hard in the moment, but it's going to create a better dynamic for you and your child that you probably would want to look at. Um, the second thing to that, of and again, understanding that it's going to be hard to set the boundary, but the question is like, when do you want to have that hard moment right now and have long-term success, or do you prefer to have just long-term struggle? So besides that, another thing that I want to touch on or like really debunk is a myth here that most parents, when their child engages in some type of aggression, yelling, power struggle, going back and forth, being disrespectful, anything like that, most parents come to me and tell me, well, they're being manipulative, or they're being stubborn, or they just want what they want when they want it. And that is true, partly. It comes from the perspective that children are going to act based on what they want, right? Say, let's take an example, a child who asked you for extra screen time and you said no, and they storm out, throw things, try to hit you, etc., etc. On the surface, it may seem like that child just wants that screen time, and that's why they are reacting the way that they are, because they wanted the screen time and you told them no. However, that is one perspective. There is another equally important part of the equation that plays a role in your child doing all of this, which is that children, especially those with developmental disabilities, autism, ADHD, are really craving structure. They want to understand their world because the majority of what they sense from the world is very chaotic and chaotic and unpredictable for them. So what happens is that they want to test the boundaries because they want to know where the boundaries are. It's a very it's a brain perspective. It's a perspective from the autonomic nervous system and the brain that they, without knowing, are testing. So they want to know. So what happens is, like, when you don't hold your boundaries, when you one day say yes and another day say no, what happens is that their brain doesn't understand what is happening, so they learn to test you constantly. And yes, again, what I'm trying to explain is that kids are motivated by what they want, but they're also motivated by having that predictability. And so when you move your boundaries around all the time, whether it is because you're exhausted, because you prefer to not deal with a meltdown in this moment, etc., that actually creates this cycle that tells their brain, oh, I need to test more because I don't understand these boundaries. So I need to know how far I can take it so that I can understand it. And so it becomes a cycle that they continue to test. That's why it's so, so, so important that we have those boundaries and that we are consistent with them, particularly with children with developmental disabilities. And just as an example, like, imagine that you have a boss that, one day it's okay to yell at your people, another day it's okay to be late, the other day if you're late you get written up. There's going to be a point in which you are going to try to test your boss just so that you can understand their boundaries. It's going to be the same for your child, and if you can imagine yourself in that situation, that's going to be very emotionally exhausting to try to figure out what you mean or what you want at any given point. So again, very, very important to understand the two perspectives as to why kids test your boundaries. And I actually want to give you guys one thing that you can take right now and implement at home. And it's to pick one boundary that you can hold this week. It could be super small, like maybe it's screen time, maybe it's no snacks before dinner, maybe it's cleaning up your toys after you're done playing with them, whatever it is. And if you don't know where to start because you want all these boundaries, maybe just ask yourself this question: what is one boundary that if I held consistently, meaning my child doesn't push back, would make the rest of my day easier? Is it morning time? Is it screen? Is it shoes? Whichever one it is, just pick one and be consistent across time. The second thing to that, to be prepared for, is that you are going to do something balloons. You're going to be doing something different than what your child is used to, right? You are holding actually a boundary consistently over time, which means they're not going to be used to it. Expect a reaction and prepare for it. If you see an escalation from your child, if you see more of a behavior initially, that does not mean that you're doing it wrong or that it will be like that forever. It will just be temporary because you are doing something different. And so that's uncomfortable to them. The more that you stay consistent, the more that they will understand faster. So that's it for what I wanted to share today. If you have any specific questions about how or a specific situation with your child, definitely let me know, or follow us on social media, and I'm happy to help. Let's see. Okay, so I just talked a little bit about boundaries and boundary setting and why it's so important to um, have those consistently so that your child gets used to them. Does anybody have any examples or any questions that you guys want to go over? Let me know in the chat, and I'll definitely take a moment to answer them for you and your specific child. And if not, then I will see you guys next time. Ooh, I see a question. Shouldn't my child just listen to me? Um, it's a great question. um, yes and no. There is a common misconception from parents that, just because you're the parent, you should be able to tell your child to do something and they'll listen. The problem with that is that assumes that you have the power over the child just because you're the parent, missing an important part, which is the connection or the relationship. Children typically will listen when they feel connected and when they feel like they actually have a relationship with you for you to be the guide. So when that is missing, and just so you know, like, part of the relationship is not just you being like the parent. Of course you love them, you play with them, all of that stuff. It's more, can they trust that you will actually mean what you say and say what you mean, and hold your boundaries. So part of that relationship is actually boundary creation. So when you don't do that, it's kind of like it makes no sense. It's contradictory to what you typically would think. But no, children will not just listen to you unless you teach them to listen to you. Good question, though. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll see you guys. Oh, one more. Often we get from parents that any boundary leads to a meltdown. How do we prevent that? This is a great question. Like I mentioned, realistically, especially if you have not been consistent with your boundaries, the moment that you start being consistent with them, you are more than likely going to get a meltdown, going to get an escalation. And I really highly recommend that you just prepare for that, like mentally, having the mental bandwidth to actually deal with the meltdown, with the behavior. Because what's really going to teach your child that you're going to hold that boundary is overcoming that objection and then keeping your boundary. Now, however, of course, we never want to, purposefully send children over the edge and have behaviors just to have behaviors. The way that you can prevent a little bit more a huge meltdown when you're holding the boundary is that you make it super small, the minimum amount of effort required so that you can still hold the boundary, but you still give your child the most. I'll give you an example. If you give your child screen time for 2 hours and your goal is to reduce that screen time as a boundary, I would not recommend you going from 2 hours to allowing them 10 minutes. That's not going to work. That's going to give you a huge escalation. So, how you can start to prevent a little bit or at least mitigate the intensity of the escalation is to start small. Instead of 2 hours, then you give them an hour and 55 minutes and slowly start decreasing. That should allow you to still maintain a boundary but not make it so big that you get a big explosion. But frankly, you can probably expect a behavior. You can just mitigate how intense or how big it is. Um, Screen time is a big one. Do you have any tips around screen time boundaries? The biggest tip about on screen time boundaries that I have is to maybe have like a schedule, a predetermined time in which the screen time is available. Most commonly, screen time challenges that I see is because there is no structure around the screen. These are kids that have their iPad accessible to them at any point, at any time. I always tell parents to use screen time as a luxury, like as an added benefit to the child's life, as opposed to something that they have freely available. So, what you can start doing is to just make screen time available at predetermined times, after dinner, after you complete your homework, in the morning for 15 minutes, etc., etc. The more that you add structure to when that screen time is available, the easier it's going to be for you to remove that screen, because then children start to understand, oh, this is the time for this, as opposed to anytime, anywhere. Great questions. And I think that every time I say that, we come up with a new one. I love this. Um, what about when parents, spouses change boundaries? How do you suggest parent overcome that without confusing the child? This is a great question, and I actually see it quite often, especially parents living in the same household. What children are going to do naturally is if mom says no and dad is likely gonna say yes, I'm gonna go to mom, say no, make her mad, and go to dad, and then dad is gonna give it to me. And that really not only confuses the child, it actually teaches them that they can go around that way, and that's actually increasingly problematic. So what I would recommend for this is actually spouses getting on the same page. This is a lot of, actually, in working with parents, a lot of what our program does is really aligning the parents on what is our middle ground, where are we okay with holding, and then going from there. It can start super small on just the smallest things that you guys can agree on, but consistency across parents is going to be so important. So my suggestion for you is, if you and your partner change boundaries, is to have a conversation. It's very important that you guys get on the same page. How do you suggest parents have that conversation? In my personal experience, I have seen, understandably, these conversations be challenging for parents to have alone. So I definitely would recommend that you invite a third party to the conversation, whether it is, again, somebody like us, behavior expert, some type of neutral party that can help you guys have the conversation, so that you guys can achieve a middle ground. I can tell you, probably 100% of the time, every time I have had these conversations with parents, we actually do reach an agreement. Sometimes it seems impossible when each of you have different ideas, different beliefs, different styles of communication. But when you have a middle person that can agree and communicate between you two, is a lot easier. Also, it's important to keep in mind that you both want the same thing. You both want an easier, smoother time, smoother dynamic between the families. So keeping that in mind is super important. A lot of the times, what I see is that the conflict becomes between parenting styles, when it's not really that. It's not parent to parent. It's actually like, how can we unite to help our child best? Again, probably 100% of the time, it's worked for me when I've helped parents in this way. I also, if your situation is a little bit, more extreme, where the conflict has gotten potentially out of hand, and your partner maybe is not on board, they don't want to do that, absolutely not. I want you to know too that you don't need them to be on board with you to make change with your child. If you actually start with you changing your behavior and being consistent in what you're doing with your child, then your child will start changing their behavior, and it will bring your partner in. That's the other thing I see. It just takes a little bit longer, but know this: you do not need your partner to be on board with what you're doing in order for you to see change. So, number one, try to get in the middle. If you can't, just do your thing. You will see change, and then they'll follow you. Cool. All of those are great questions. Awesome. So that was the last question, and I'll see you guys next time.